I muted myself. Hello, welcome,
Yeah. Good
welcome
morning.
everyone. Good morning. Hello, Greg. Hi, Irina. Leanne, nice to see you. Hello, Rebecca. Tessa, great to have you joining us today. Just as we're waiting for some more people to arrive, if you can just let us know that you can see and hear us okay, if you can see the slides, just pop into the chat. That would be fantastic. Also, if you just want to introduce yourself briefly in the chat, maybe where you're joining us from today, what organization, maybe your role there as well, is always really good to see who else we've got on the call today. And just as we wait a couple of moments. We know that often people jump in the last moment. And if possible, if you have the capability to pop your camera on, thanks Rebecca and Leanne. It's so good to see your faces. We love to run these sessions just like an in-person event. So if you are able to join us on camera, we absolutely love to see your faces. Thanks, Beck, Senior Product Manager at PageUp. Love it. Good, good. And we'll do an official acknowledgement of country as well. So we'd like to begin these sessions by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are all learning today. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. A few more people joining. There we go. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome. So we've got Leanne here, fantastic marketing and comms at Atsol. Greg, mining engineer and consultancy, Vantage Mining, wonderful. Rebecca, no worries that
Oh,
kids are
Beck.
running around the
That's reality, isn't it?
Yeah, if the camera or the audio disappears, I'm probably strangling one of them. So just carry on. I'll be back.
That's all right.
Great idea.
Totally fine. That's all good. So would love to do, I guess, a quick pulse check before we just dive into to the content. What is it that brought you here today? What is it that what excites you or interests you about strategy execution? What is it that prompted you to join us today? If you can pop something into the chat, we'd love to hear maybe some of the challenges that you find when it comes to delivering on your strategy. What gets in the way? Where do things get stuck? Would really be great to hear, what it is that brought you here today. Ah, Greg, you've got your camera working. That's
Oh, well done,
wonderful.
Greg.
Got to work.
You were just hiding, weren't you?
That's right. I'm
Yeah.
shy.
Good to see your smiling face anyway.
You too, Phil.
So, Leanne, any tips and tricks you can get to help the team progress the strategy rather than just a set and forget? Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. That's great, Leanne. We'll definitely be covering that off. It would be great to hear from a couple of people. What is it that brought you here today? Just while you're popping that in, you can see also some of the objectives and our agenda here on the slide. So really by the end of the session, our goal is that you leave with five things. So the first is a clearer understanding of, why the strategy often fails. As I'm sure, many of us are in that position or have been in that position in the past, and why it often fails to translate into
Mhm.
consistent execution. Second is a stronger line of sight from strategy to that weekly action. So as you mentioned, Leanne, how do we actually make some movement and not just have a strategy be a set and forget? Third, we're looking at clearer thinking around accountability and decision rights, so that less of that work gets stuck in escalation. We're also going to be looking at a simple execution rhythm that supports that follow through rather than having, more noise around. And then fifth, we're going to look at also a practical 30-day plan to help you to start embedding this into the real work that your team's doing. So this isn't just a conversation about execution or strategy execution. It's a practical session designed to help you think differently and then also act differently after today's session. So I'm just going to bring that chat up. There we go. Fantastic. So, Greg, how to simplify the strategy so that others don't see it as just more work that doesn't add value. Yeah, awesome. Tessa and Sophie from Mansfield Autism Statewide Services. We're strategy nerds. Love it. Your focus, Rebecca, is on how to progress strategy in challenging circumstances. Main challenge currently is a team across multiple regions with very different competing priorities. Yeah, amazing. Okay, fantastic. That gives us some really good context for the session today. So just to go a little bit deeper, this really maps out the journey that we're going to be taking today. So we'll be moving through five, I guess, practical levers that shape how that strategy execution happens in the real world. So we're looking at focus, culture, accountability, decision path, and then we're also going to zoom in on, I guess, one key component being meetings today. So we're going to start with that bigger picture. And then we're going to, look at why execution often breaks down, even in teams that are really capable and committed, and when they're working really hard, why it still breaks down then. And so from there, we'll then move into what that stronger execution actually requires in practice, and what clearer priorities look like. So how that ownership becomes more visible, how decision making can move with less friction, and then we'll look at that everyday operating rhythm as well. Yeah, because it's not just shaped by the strategy documents or the planning sessions. It's actually shaped by the way people meet, how we communicate, how we escalate and follow through. So super practical today. So yeah, as I've said, we're starting at the why and then moving right through to what we're calling the wow at the end.
Ways of working.
Ways of working. So most of us tend to build our success by being really good at something, and I think this is really great context for us to have as we're looking through and looking at the content and the conversations of today. We often start by being really good at or that technical expertise. So it might be problem solving, our ability to deliver results personally by ourselves. But then as we move up and through those leadership ranks, as you can see here, starting down the bottom at functional expert, moving through people leader, strategic influencer, through to the enterprise leader. Um, as we move up through those ranks, what got us to where we were isn't necessarily going to get us to where we want to be. So that shift into enterprise leadership actually requires a whole new operating system. So it would be great to hear in the chat, just based on this slide. You might like to have a bit of a look up and down that triangle. Where do you feel you might be sitting currently? We'd love to get a bit of a sense of, you know, where you feel you're at right now. If you can pop it into the chat. If you can't immediately see where you might be sitting, maybe have a look at some of the key problems at each of those levels, or what might be keeping you stuck at each of those levels to help identify where you might currently be sitting. And just so that we can get a bit of a sense of where we're at in the room, it's going to help us to tailor and identify the best conversations and content for today. It's also great for us to be able to have that awareness, that self-awareness of where we might be sitting on this ladder. Or if you prefer to come off mute rather than pop in the chat, that's fine too. We're a nice small group today. And feel you between strategic influencer and people leader. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You might be moving through from one level through to another. Rebecca, people leader, but starting to operate as a strategic influencer. Yeah, fantastic. Awesome. And if you're not sure, that's absolutely fine too. Tessa, you think your team leaders are trying to do all four of these things? Yeah. Interesting. Probably should be restructured to focus. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good insight. Small business, one of your main challenges for all three directors is that you operate across all of them. Yeah, and you need to balance priorities. Yeah, interesting insight. So that's just giving us a good sense of where we feel we're at from a leadership perspective. And I think now we want to look at the challenge and the opportunity that brings us together today. And Phil, I'm going to pass across to you to take us through
Hmm?
this section.
Sounds good. Good morning again, everyone. Great to have you here. Yeah, we're strategy nerds as well. We've been working with more than 3,000. I've personally worked with more than 3,000 teams over 3 decades. And strategy is one of those areas that just was really challenging to nail for people. One, to nail it, but also have the clarity around that, and then the execution focus to actually get it done. So, one of the stats I love, which I've been quoting for a couple of years now from a survey about 3 years ago, that talked about 80% of chief executives are dissatisfied with the execution of strategy. So it's easy to come up with a nice glossy brochure document, but it's the execution where the single point of failure often is. And so this is the paradox of performance. And even though organizations do focus, heavily in all of the things mentioned there, we still get inconsistent leadership, fragmented execution, and depleted vitality. So we talk about vitality as team health or organizational health, which is all about leadership, culture, resilience, well-being, etc. So the things that really drive them. So we're going to start the big picture, and then we're going to narrow it down. And as Kelly's already mentioned, towards the end, we're going to be getting right down into the really practical stuff around ways of working. And because this is a single webinar, if you like, even though that's a series, they don't all necessarily kind of, segment, one builds on the other. We're going to give you kind of a rounded solution, if you like, rather than just focus on line of sight, which is from our amplifier model, which is the connection between strategy and an executive team or a leadership team. So we're going to give you a bit broader value add around that, just so it makes a little bit more sense for you. So this is one of the slides we've recently created around the hidden tax of organizational friction. You can call it bureaucracy, whatever you'd like, but the erosion. So we start with a theoretical kind of business yield around revenue and profitability. And then as things in terms of communication, siloed work, low levels of trust, burnout, attrition, lack of clarity, etc., we surely and sequentially really take away from our theoretical business yield, and we realize an actual profit which is much lower than it could or should be because of this friction tax. And so part of strategy execution is actually how do we reduce the friction and the noise, within the team or within the organization. It also kind of amazes me, over so many years talking about this, and there's so much evidence to suggest that we focus on, what most people focus on is the strategy. And in fact, as a rough rule of thumb, around 90% of the focus is on strategy. Whereas, in fact, where we should be focusing on is the root causes of execution failure. So today is really about getting clarity on the strategy, but then 90% of it is actually about the realization of that strategy. So I don't know, does that just give me a thumbs up or a wave if that kind of resonates with you? Yep, couple of nods, couple of winks. Yeah, awesome. And so that's where we really support organizations, is to, yes, strategy is cool, but most of the time it's not about actually creating a better strategy. It's actually creating the enterprise or the team that actually supports the execution of that strategy. And so, Kelly, you've got another way of thinking about that. So I'll let you manage the
Yeah.
next slide.
Yeah, awesome. So what we often see organizations try to improve performance by like managing performance. But really, performance isn't the starting point. It's actually the downstream result. So what we should really be paying attention to are those upstream pieces. So yes, you need that strategic clarity. You need to know where you're going, but that alone, it's not enough. So we want to build a culture that supports performance and really strong and capable leaders to actually bring the strategy to life. So the, performance, the downstream outcome of how well the business is led and how well the culture actually enables that work. So what that means is really that sustainable return on investment can't be achieved by just managing performance. It's got to require optimizing the catalyst, which we're looking at as that leadership capacity and capability, and also focusing on organizational health as well. And so, if we look at this in a different way, or if we go a little bit deeper, and if we were to look at, the organization kind of like a pipe, for example, where the leadership is that energy that's entering the pipe, it's the direction, pressure, and the momentum that leaders are trying to create. And then organizational health determines that diameter of the pipe and how easily that energy can actually move through it. So when the pipe's really wide and clear, that leadership energy travels easily. The strategy can be understood, that trust is really high and decisions can actually move quickly. And people actually understand what matters and how to act on what matters. But then if that pipe is narrow or blocked, that energy can get lost and that clarity can drop and friction rises and work slows down. So low trust can narrow that pipe. Poor role clarity can narrow the pipe. Silos, working in silos will narrow the pipe. Overload, if people feel overloaded, that will also narrow the pipe. And any unsafe challenge also narrows the pipe. So, even with really strong leaders and strong leadership capability, you'll only get a fraction of that intended energy flowing through to the work if the organizational culture, organizational health is poor. And so that's why performance isn't just, a leadership issue or just a performance issue. It's a whole system issue. We need to be looking at it from every different angle. So if the health of the system's constrained, then obviously the flow of execution is constrained as well.
Great. Kelly just mentioned overload. Then I'd love just to hear from one or two people. I am finding each year systems, organizations, and leaders seem to be under more stress and more pressure, more load. And for the first time, not the first time, but there's more leaders. I'm talking to leaders in January and February, and of course this month, and they're saying they're kind of burnt out already. So normally you'd get that leading up to Christmas, but now people are reporting, I've had a break, but I'm still my reservoir is kind of depleted or empty. So I don't know what are you hearing? I'd love to hear from one or two people about either yourself or your team, your organization. So how are you finding that in terms of what Kelly was talking about, the pipeline, the pipe, so to speak?
I'm happy to speak.
Thanks, Leanne, and then Greg.
Um, it's interesting that you say that because I was chatting to some peers and even my husband at home. And yeah, we had an amazing break in January and we've come back. And I don't know whether it's because I've got kids at school as well. So I don't know whether it's the short term. I
Mm,
don't know whether it's the external environment that's going on around us at the moment. But I would agree. I had a beautiful break. I felt rested, but I'm not feeling as rested now. Like I
mm,
feel like for some reason I'm in a sprint mode or something like I can't explain it.
mm.
So I'm actually, at least I'm aware of that and I'm trying to slow myself down so that
Yeah,
I'm not then projecting that onto my team, which is one of the challenges. But even our organization, we're going through a lot of change at the moment as well. So I don't
yeah.
know whether it's also that that's
Mm.
that's causing that.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. It's interesting, isn't it? And you'll be aware of the stats that come out kind of every so often, definitely yearly, but more regularly than that, about 50% are reporting feeling burnt out. And so one of the levers that most organizations don't think about is clarity of strategy is actually one of the levers to reduce burnout. And so when
Mm.
we're working with executive teams, most of the time they want us to work with, you need to fix up John and Jill, they're fighting and what have you. But actually, if John and Jill are occupying roles and we get clarity around roles and clarity around the strategy, etc., suddenly John and Jill are working well together. And so that's that more holistic view that I think, hopefully this webinar helps us have another lens on as well. So, hey, Greg, you're in the consulting world. Welcome. How are
Thanks,
you finding
Phil.
your clients, mate?
Um, yeah, so I was probably going to talk about it in a few different areas. The first, I
Okay.
suppose, talking a bit about what Leanne said, I had a pretty long break over Christmas as well, and I don't think I'm ever going to do it again because that bow wave when I came back wasn't
Right.
to get through.
The bow
I
wave.
mean,
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it.
yeah, I mean, I think look, you got to have breaks. So obviously, I will, but it's like yeah, it is hard work coming back and getting across that.
Mm,
We've just started a new consulting company. Three of us have joined. So I guess this year is probably a bit different to other years for me, where we're trying to form that and grow pretty quickly as we're going. We did have a bit of a strategy session and vision stretch session recently, which was actually after that last workshop that I was part of, Phil. And there's probably one clear immediate goal for us, which is to build to a certain size, and I guess that's provided a bit of clarity for us when you're talking about thinking about how busy you are and what you're trying to do, and I guess it anchors you to this is what we're trying to achieve, which I think is good, which probably I don't know in a way de-stresses because you,
mm,
you know what you're trying to achieve, so that's good.
absolutely.
Then if I think about clients, so probably the main client that I work with, I think they've often got a bit of churn happening. I can't say that I would see anything different year on year. It's more like with them, it's actually through the year. They seem to always have a poor start to the year, whether it's weather or bushfires or various
Mm,
things that sort of impact them, and they spend the rest of the year trying to catch up. So they're always under pressure. But I'm not sure that there's any change year on year
right.
that I've
Mm,
noticed.
okay. Yeah. Thanks for that insight. Are they our friends to the north, Greg, or different friends?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a guess. Very good. Very good. That shall remain nameless.
Yeah.
Hi, Jonathan here from Equicare.
Oh, go, Jonathan.
One of the things for us is from the industry point of view, the key challenges that always come in between are the legislative changes, right?
Mm,
Sometimes, particularly in where we are today with the Aged Care Act that was rolled out in November. So there's a lot of, I guess, domino effect in terms of what are the things that's happening. Some of the things are still unknown. Some of the things we're still figuring out. Some of the things that we're expected to roll out. There's quite a few things that have those external influences that sometimes, in as much as you can plan for a lot of those things and put it into perspective, as those external factors drop in, then you're finding yourself reprioritizing, understanding what it means, and then some
mm.
things go up, certain things come down on the ladder, and so it's always that challenge that we're trying to adapt to as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the government was seriously lagging, weren't they, on the actual how? They created the Aged Care Act, but then there was no how to follow it up and the metrics around that, which are seriously challenging. Excellent. Medical Care is a fantastic organization, one of the most caring organizations I've ever worked with. So there you go. Awesome to have you here. Um, so one of the things we wanted to talk about as well, and I really don't like the term stagility, but it kind of, it sounds like a consultant term, right? So I didn't make it up. It's been talked about for years and years and years now, but I didn't want to lose the power of the metaphor, and that is that we need a stable core and an agility and an agile kind of way to create the how to operationalize the strategy. So the stable core, of course, is the strategy, and that's the backbone. It includes things like governance and the cultural anchors that we see as essential. Then the dynamic edge, though, and we'll get into the detail in a moment around this, that flat factory floor management doesn't really cut it anymore. And so, whilst we can create a structure and clarity, but the operationalization of that needs to be agile and kind of much more contemporary around that. So, the number in the middle is from McKinsey in terms of their organizational health index. So, if you're clear on those, on both have stability and agility, have a 70% chance of being in the top quartile of organizational health and therefore business performance. So we talk about the hardware being the structure, the strategy, and then the agility part is kind of the apps, if you like, if we're thinking about a mobile phone metaphor. So, and we can't have too much of one. Too much agility leads to chaos. Too much stability leads to a slow moving bureaucracy. So, power of the end, and that's what we're going to really focus on today, which Kelly's going to introduce Amplify, because that's we think, a really robust model and framework, which this webinar really is based on. So over to you, Kelly.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Phil. So really, Amplify is the way that we are thinking about how individuals can be supported to build a high-performing team. And so Amplify is our mastermind, the name of our mastermind program, but it's also a cohesive architecture. And so the way we're thinking about it is it's not another initiative, it's actually a coherent system. And I think this is, one of the core shifts is it's a system and how that system works together. So sustained performance, as we know, requires alignment across all of these three critical systems. So it's how the business delivers, how leaders execute, and also how the culture enables people. So this is our Amplify architecture, or what we're calling the Amplify architecture, with those three domains. So the business performance blueprint, which we're seeing as the engine, the vitality method, which we're seeing as the fuel, and then the leadership framework we're looking at as the catalyst. And so if, vitality is the fuel and performance is the engine, then leadership is that spark that ignites movement. And so if one of these three is weak, then performance becomes harder than it should, and executing on the strategy becomes harder than it should. But if they align, then that performance becomes much more sustainable. And so, just to give you a different lens, this is the model that we're looking at. So, this is our Amplify system architecture, or what we're calling performance by design. So, again, these three pillars here, or these three intersecting domains. So these are the domains that actually make up the core of our Amplify Mastermind, which is, I guess, an experience really that's designed for senior leaders who want dedicated support to building that thriving high performance team that turns strategy into impact for the organization. So you can see here the first domain is the business performance blueprint. So that's the engine, like I said. So that's about direction, design, and delivery. And then that second domain is the vitality method. So shaping the culture, the connection, and capacity as well. And then the third is the leadership framework. So the catalyst, it's how leaders shape the environment and how they reinforce excellence throughout their teams and how they sustain that execution. So when we're talking about building a high performance team that delivers on the strategy, we're talking about all of these three domains working really well together. And so that's what we help senior leaders work towards in our mastermind. We are opening a small number of places today for our April intake. So if anyone's curious, we'll pop some details into the chat shortly so you can have a bit of a look about what the mastermind's all about. But today, you can see there we're zooming in on just one part of the business performance blueprint. So you can see inside direction, then we've got it highlighted, which is what we're calling P2, line of sight. So we'll be looking at a little bit about the strategic intent, line of sight, and real team, real purpose, but predominantly looking at line of sight. So line of sight really is about whether people can actually connect the strategy to their day-to-day work.
Excellent. And so, yeah, I probably released the metaphor a little bit early, but this slide talks to exactly what I was saying before, that the left side, the business performance, is the hardware, the phone, if you like, and the right side, the vitality method, is the apps or the agility. So apps change regularly, they're updated, as is hardware and phones, but that tends to be the solid structure, which really creates stability and agility at the same time. All right, so what I'd love you to do is, I don't think you've got this in e-form, electronic form, but this is how we diagnose. So every 6 week cycle within Amplify, we ask people to think about red, amber, green for each of these areas across the three domains. So these are the 9 drivers within performance. So how it works is, if you rate yourself a yellow or a red, say at P1, then you probably stop there, and that's where action's required. But if you're, say, green for P1, P2, P3, then you start getting into yellows and reds, you stop there, and then there's a solution. So today, I'd love you just to maybe write down what would be where would you stop? Is the strategy clear in your organization and your team? And if it's clear, it's a green, for example. If it's a yellow in P2, we're going to be focusing mostly on P2 today, as we've mentioned a few times. But I'll just give you a moment to have a look through that And if you just make a note about where you stop, where do you hit yellows and reds? If you like most teams, most organizations, you kind of stop somewhere between P1 and P3. But if you're lucky, or you've put the the work in, you may be greens and start hitting yellows and reds later. I'd love just to hear from two people where you landed. So you might say, P1 red, stop there, kind of thing. Or, no, I made it to P5, before we started turning yellow and red. So you'd like to come off mute and just talk to it briefly. Greg, it feels like you're doing some P1 work the other day with your two co-directors.
Yeah, so I think we've got, if I think about just the team of just the directors, we've got a few people like with broader than that as well that have joined us. But if I think of just about as us directors, I think P1 and P2 we're actually going right now.
Hmm.
P3 we probably got a bit of work to do just around the three of us gelling.
Yeah.
We're all quite different, which is deliberate and good. But there's a bit of forming, norming, storming still happening, which I think is natural, but I think that's where our focus currently needs to be to make sure that our pipe isn't clogged, I suppose.
Mm. Good use of the metaphor. Thanks, Greg. Maybe one other who'd like to talk to where you landed.
I can.
Yeah, thanks, Tess.
So there's two of us in the room, which is why we're on the, yeah, here. And our screen
Hello.
is up there, so there's a whole bunch of things happening. But anyway,
Yep.
we thought we had green for P1, which we were pretty happy with,
Mm.
yellow for P2, and then red for the rest of them.
Okay. Yep.
Got a bit of work to do, but it's very handy, this structure.
It is. It is. Yeah, it's just a very quick audit. Yeah, every 6 weeks, and it keeps us fresh and focused on the things that we need to really focus on. Okay, thank you. So, as a transition point, I'd like to start with a riddle. There's seven frogs sitting on a log, and three decide to jump off. How many are left? Just pop it in the chat. Three decide to jump off. How many are left? I feel this is a trick question. But four. I know it's a trick question, but I'm going to answer four anyway. Seven, question mark. Greg's not so sure. Four. Yeah, the correct answer is seven, because deciding and acting is different. Three decided, but they didn't actually do anything with it. So we're going to move into action. And that was my clumsy transition to the execution diagnostic. So thinking about those five areas, which I'm not going to cover now because Kelly's already gone through them, but you'll see the remainder of this webinar really now we're getting into these five areas, starting at a very high level, right down to something that we see most teams have a pain point around, and that is meetings. And as I think we've already discussed in a bit of a theme, and of course this is a Brené Brown-ism for those who follow her or have attended one of our Dare to Lead programs, clear is kind and nothing rings truer in terms of the strategy. And clarity really takes a lot of noise out and stress and burnout in teams and systems. So we can move from, I don't know where this feels like this for you, the left-hand side, or it might be present or previously, but I do hear leadership teams com constantly kind of talking about and sometimes complaining about how everything flows up to them and the decision making is with them rather than being able to push that down. So the right-hand side, which is much more clarity, having clear strategic pillars, as we call them, and then having single points of accountability. So as I said, this is not about the how around P1. Um, today's focus is mostly on P2, but we did want to really just give you a little bit of an insight into how we think about it. And this is our strategy pyramid, which by design is a linear process, but we know that the actual how and the machinations is much more organic and iterative. But this is kind of strategic planning 101, right? There's nothing special or different about this framework, but this provides the stability then yeah, for clarity around the organization. I was working with an organization, government entity, or have been for some time now. And when we first started working on the strategy, there was too many strategic plans. There was a lack of clarity. There was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects and initiatives, and none of them really linked very well to the strategy. So over the last 2 months or 3 months, they're in a completely different position now because we've followed this framework effectively and really moved them to a greater point of clarity, which is already starting to take some of the noise out of the system. People complaining, top team aren't doing X or Y. But if we can start to address some of the conditions, we can really move forward rapidly. So this is one of the key outcomes. And again, we see, there's a clear mission statement, vision statement, and a picture of success. Many organizations confuse the mission and the vision. And sometimes for fun, I might put up 20 mission and vision statements all around the room and say, tell me which is a mission and which is a vision statement. And then the second question is, what organizations do they come from? And most of the time, people can't discern between the two because organizations really blend them and mix them up. So getting clear on mission is our purpose and probably doesn't change unless there's a major change in why you exist as an organization. Vision is a destination. That's kind of how we think about it. Then we apply a SWOT analysis to the vision statement and the future direction, which in this case is by 2030 in our Greenflow Technologies, which is a made-up company. And then where that gets us, this is the first pillar, sorry, the first tool that was sent to you by email, but will also be in the chat that Sarah will pop in. Again, this isn't earth-shattering, but it's surprising how many organizations and teams don't have something like this. And so the strategic anchor is another word for pillar. The organizations call it different names. It doesn't really matter as long as you don't have any more than three or four maximum. If you have more than four kind of strategic pillars, then there's probably too many. You can see their goals, actions, who, measures of success, when, and other. So this is the framework we've been using for a long time. It really creates a lot of cut through for organizations. And if I was to show you an example of this for Greenflow, so as I said, there's nothing magical about this tool except that it provides crystal clear clarity and importantly, a single point of accountability. So often we see in the who is often a function or a division. So we have a role or a name in there. So it's crystal clear. Where that came from in a way was from personal experience. So when our kids were younger and we had a pool and we'd have 20 adults around, we'd be having drinks and a barbecue or what have you. And we realized everyone was watching the kids in the pool and no one was watching the kids in the pool because there's 20 people around. And it was quite scary. So we devised a very simple wristband, an armband. You're the single point of accountability. You're responsible for the safety of the kids in the pool. And I think we do that in organizations, right? We have about 20 people. Who's actually accountable here? Who's responsible for getting things done? And so that's super important. Then that action planning is cascaded, as I've just done recently with the government agency I talked about. So from the executive team to the functional division, it says function and division twice there. Functional division, then groups or teams. And of course, they will change and become, less kind of strategic, I guess, right at the grassroots level. That's where the stability, the rigidity, the linear notion of strategy changes for us. Uh, you've set kind of crystal clear plans, but then some other principles start to come in, which are more about agility. So high performing organizations don't choose between the two, as we've talked about. Um, Way back in the ANZ days when I was in the Breakout team, John McFarlane, I still remember he had one of the most beautiful phrases and he'd use it repeatedly when we talked about strategy. And one day I had a chat with him and I said, I think you should centrally fund 40,000 people going through this program. And he said, Phil, freedom with accountability. If they don't do the program, that's fine, but I'll hold them accountable to the results they get. If they do the program, that's great. I'll still hold them accountable for the results they get. Um, so empower teams and not individuals. We often talk about empowering individuals, but actually teams are the unit of productivity in organizations, so that's far more effective. And create. This is an interesting one. What do you reckon I mean by create a culture? And I've never actually read anything about this. I should write a blog or something about it, but create a culture where accountability flows uphill. What do you think I mean by that? It's a tricky one. Any guesses?
I think if you've got accountability sort of embedded in
Mm.
the organization and the way that things are done, then the leader's almost, it's incumbent on the leader to make sure that they do what they're going to say they're going to do as well. So
Mm.
lead by example and not just, holding people accountable, but actually expecting that their people expect that of them.
Yep, nice one. And I'm noticing in the chat as well from Tessa and Tom. So it's kind of almost the opposite of what John was saying, but um, how do we have accountability bubble up? I was working with one of the big Australian universities for about 18 months last year and the year before, and one of the leaders protested or said, with great pride, I hold my people accountable. And I said, oh, it sounds like a failure of leadership. I was trying to be inherently provocative, and he said, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" I said, "Well, what happens when you're not there? Who holds them accountable?" And so, in a moment, we'll kind of dive into that a little more as a key principle around accountability bubbling up. If people are clear on what they need to do, we don't have to manage them like they're working in a factory. We can give them more freedom to make the choices to meet the outcomes, yeah, rather than being too task driven. This is just a quick one from Deloitte, another organization, another consulting firm talking about stagility. But again, it's not a bad little infographic or infogram around. I really like living the trend. So anchor the work, anchor the organization, and anchor the worker. So for me, this is all about clarity, which then allows people to, that's that agile piece to adapt and thrive. Some interesting figures there as well. So I thought we'd just take a slight, I've talked about factory management quite a few times now. This is from some of you who have attended more than one of our webinars may have seen this before, but um, most organizations are structured on the left, but most organizations operate like the one on the right. And so we need to be really clear about how organizations operate in reality. Who thinks organizations actually operate in a very linear, structured way like the left-hand side? Just put your hand up. No, none do, right? We have the organizational structure is a very loose representation of actually what happens in the organization. And so I really like the work of Niels Fledgling, who talks about three structures. One is informal, and the power that we gain within that, or the power that's useful in that, is the ability to influence. Then the value is actually created, and that's often through our reputation and people coming to us because they know we can get stuff done. And then the formal structure. We need to be clear about how these structures operate if we're really to be successful in terms of activation of strategy. So again, you'll get these slides. I know there's a lot of information here, but how do we pick out the best parts of the formal, informal, and value creation? Many organizations stay in the formal column and they don't necessarily think much about the informal and the value creation. And so, yeah, as I said, within the Amplified program, we talk about all three because we know that is really helpful. As I mentioned earlier, so self-organization or empowerment must be at the team level. All right, so I'm sure you've all seen this before, but we've just popped a couple of one-page strategy plans. I think these are gold, right? So these kinds of things where we do have a one-pager, um, rather than like an 80-page strategy. You might still have that, but one of the best tests is your strategy clear, is can you walk around and ask people, what are the three most important things we're focusing on this year, or what's our destination? Where do we aim to be in 3 years? You don't need to use formal kind of language, but just being super clear on why we're in business and what we're trying to achieve is harder than it sounds. I'm working with one organization where they do it exceptionally well, and they just repeat the messaging, but in a very authentic way. And so they've done a kind of a survey recently in terms of the employee value proposition. And in a 12,000 person organization, you can ask anyone from the top right to someone working, at the service level, and they understand the strategy. That's amazing, and that's very rare for that to actually occur. So this is our plan on a page. It's a little bit different to the ones we just showed you, but this is we also have provided a template, and it's also in the chat. But you can see we're really clear on our purpose and our promise. We're clear on our destination, and then on the right-hand side is really our values. Then we have a client persona that sits in the middle, and our ideal buyer. So giving you away our trade secrets here, but who's our kind of key focus as a decision maker. And so this is our version of our one-page plan. Of course, we've got other ones that are more detailed, more numerical, but this serves as a really nice touchstone for us. All right, the 30-day plan. This is one of the promises. So just invite you to think about this briefly, and we're going to revisit this later after you've got a little bit more information. I've had a few more conversations, but how clear are those 3 or 4 strategic pillars that we've talked about in terms of the strategy? It could be, if you're in the leadership team, it could be the organizational strategy, but if you're the next level down, for example, it could be the pillars in your team. And sometimes people kind of look up and say, well, we don't have clarity from the top team, and therefore we're struggling a little bit. So wherever you sit, have that reflection. Accountability. So, do you have really clear owners of each of the key areas and the outcomes that you're seeking? And is the decision rights clear? And then have you got some kind of, and I'm not saying, the RAG system, red, amber, green, is the be all to end all, but it's a pretty effective system, has been around for a long, long time. Do you have some way of tracking this regularly? And then 4, what are the friction points in your organization? Is it about, as was said earlier, that team leaders, for example, are trying to do all things or be all things to all people? Do you need to focus them? I think it was restructure was the words that we used to have that clarity. So just to plant the seed there, and Kelly's going to take us through a process that actually might support your creation of a 30-day plan.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So you may have noticed if you've gone through the registration process for the workshop that we've also included what we call a precision call. And so this call is designed as a one-on-one call with us to help you to actually embed what you learn here today into your organization, into your practice. So it's, we know that you're all, senior leaders, you're all working at a high level, but we also know that senior leaders also need support, and that's why we want to offer this complimentary session to help you apply, what you've learned today exactly where it matters in your organization. So these are a couple of the things that we'll cover in this call. So it's a short 20-minute call. I will pop a link into the chat now as well, so that you can go ahead and book a time over the next week or so that we can really focus on embedding what we've learned here today.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're moving to culture now. So as I said, we're probably just dipping into some really key areas, not specific to P2, but that support P2, which is that line of sight between the strategy and execution. So we're going to move into culture, which is really, of course, on the vitality method, the fuel, the things that can potentially reduce the diameter of our pipe. Again, I love some of this work. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say, we're changing culture. We can't actually change culture. We can only change the artifacts or the things that create culture. So we can't influence it directly, but we can change what is controllable within our remit, if you like. So Has people have people come across that before, or what do you think about cultures like a shadow? For me, it provides a little bit more clarity on, well, actually, how do we go about this then? Because otherwise, we just hammer people and say, you've got to live the new culture, whereas actually that's only a very small part of it, and you could argue is downstream. So yeah, I'll just pause there for a moment. What do people think? Got a nice small group today, so there's no excuses not to have a conversation. Who'd like to
Oh,
share?
I'm coming. I'm coming. I don't know that I agree with this.
Okay.
I like it as a statement. It has exactly the culture it deserves.
Yep.
But I do think there's stuff you can do to influence it.
Yep. What would be an example, Tessa?
I think so. We, for example, work with autistic kids, and one of the things we really want to be part of the culture is that there's an element of fun and people enjoying their job and having a good time. And I think you can model that, and even talk about it openly and encourage people to do it.
Yep.
And then it kind of flows through.
So how do you yeah, and I'm not trying to be too challenging here, but how do
No, no,
you
be
how do you
provocative. That's
create
fine. Yeah.
how do you create that?
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, you can do a range of different things. We also um, like encourage people to laugh at, things that might otherwise. We can't encourage people to bring a sense of humor to things. We
Yeah.
also do outside activities that could be fun and encourage people to have team bonding experiences that bring a bit of fun in. Can I say something? Yes, he's also going to tune in.
I also think it's about giving people permission to have fun. I
Yes.
think sometimes
Yes.
we are working within cultures that have mistakenly sucked all the fun out of
Yeah.
all interactions at every single level.
Hmm.
And for us, because we're client facing, it's so, so important that our teams see the fun element, the not take, I don't, when I say not taking it too seriously, I don't mean that we're dismissive about the work we're doing or
No, no, not at
not
all.
assessing risk, but that you've got to be able to give your team some of that freedom to enjoy. And if that's modeled, we find that that does have an effect on the culture. Very specifically, we're looking at play at the moment, so
Okay.
playing with clients. It always takes me back how hard people find that. Now, we're obviously in a very specific job area, but the challenge of people getting down on the ground, and we are literally looking at running workshops where we are playing,
Yeah.
Excellent.
people find it really challenging. And
Yeah,
then we
yeah,
see a few of them have these beautiful moments where they like lose all that inhibition. And I do think that there's some practical elements to that idea of let's have fun and let's play. And
yeah,
that
yeah.
is very much what we're trying to make part of our culture.
Yep. I think you've called out both ways we can change culture. So one is role modeling, absolutely. So not disagreeing with you. The second way, some of the structures you talked about, so having activities outside of work or creating an approach which includes play theory, is a way to impact culture indirectly, right? So we're kind of my background's in physical education, so I actually did a whole subject on play theory. So it's a fascinating area, and I really applaud you for bringing it into your work. That's awesome. So I love the idea, and I can imagine how uncomfortable some people might be
Really
around.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. I once went to an executive director of people and culture, and she was playing with different ways of kind of how she approached meetings. And so we sat on the floor, and there was really comfortable chairs there, but we sat on the floor, and I felt a little weird and a little bit uncomfortable, but it kind of changed the dynamic of the meeting. So, which was pretty interesting. So that's great.
I can jump in with
Yeah, thanks.
I've never actually seen culture explained like this as a shadow. I actually really resonate with this. I think it's bang on. Culture is observable, not controllable. I agree with what those ladies had just said around you can try to do things to influence, but I think um, it's almost like getting wins on the board with culture. People
Mm,
can, they make their own minds up about, how things are perceived and, what people's intentions and
yeah.
why are we doing this. And And I think, yeah, it does resonate with me that it isn't controllable. You can definitely do things to help influence, but it's a very individual observation of what that actually means and how things are interpreted, and in the masses of kind of what that does. And I've been with my organisation for many, many years, yeah, and I've seen it shift. Throughout the years, new people come in, management changes, strategy changes, and the culture definitely shifts with that.
Mm.
Even if the behaviours might be the same. Yeah, I really like this description of culture as a shadow. I haven't seen it like that before.
Great. Thanks, Beck. And I really love the work of Ken Wilber as well, who talks about the integral model, which is a theory of theories. And he talks about four quadrants. So mindsets, behaviors, and then culture. And then the fourth one is structure, systems, processes, policies, etc. And I always ask teams, well, which one should we kind of focus on first to change things? And most people, well, I get a whole array of answers, but the correct answer is all four, right? And whether you do it sequentially or concurrently. But if you want to have a better performance conversation, you could teach people how to have a better performance conversation, or you could change the system that makes them fill out a form which is, from the 19th century, which then takes them away from the behaviors you're trying to get at. So I think that's kind of where we're heading. So. All right. This is from Brave New Work, Aaron Dignan, and I really, really like his work about evolutionary organizations. And I think what we're getting to here is why strategy sometimes feels really hard, or the activation of strategy is that if we think about it even a higher level, we have an invalid operating system. So how do we change the very nature of our organizations, and how do we change how we show up, change the expectations of managers and leaders so we can create something different? And a little provocatively, I'll just let you read this quote from him. So I think this speaks to that notion of the system. And often when we talk about systems, people think we're talking about, the technology or something. We're talking about human systems, which we focus very heavily on, not as in shifting mindsets and behaviors, although that's important, but actually how does the human system hang together? What's the role of authority? How do people show up? What's their understanding of the role? So and this is linking to where we're going shortly around empowering people. So these are the critical few behaviors that we usually talk about to create, um, a culture and an environment and a climate that actually performs really highly. There's still a whole bunch of people who don't believe in psychological safety, but for us, a lot of it, most of it actually starts there. So another way to think about it, leadership instills psychological safety, how we show up. Teams expose risks early. So I'm working with a large Australian hospital at the moment in surgical services, really trying to improve the safety and culture in the operating suite. And we're kind of, got hundreds of years of hierarchy and power and how people show up in that example. But Amy Edmondson, for example, surprisingly found that those with more psychological safety report more errors because they're safer. They feel safer, right? So that's an interesting kind of artifact there. All right, let's keep moving. We'll probably have to skip through these a little quicker, but accountability. So rather than unclear ownership and overlapping roles, or really strong top-down accountability, which, as I said before, if you're not there to, hold people accountable, then we want to shift to something a little different. What do you think the difference between responsibility, ownership, and accountability is? Who'd like to either in the chat or have a crack at it?
Well, crack. I think
Yeah, great.
responsibility is probably about the doing and being responsible for doing something, I guess.
Yep.
Accountability is really probably I suppose, leads itself to thinking about being held accountable to deliver on a particular thing or action or responsibility.
Yeah.
And then ownership, I think, is something that you're probably talking about more than what I used to see being spoken about, say, 5 years ago,
Mm,
which is more ownership of the outcome, which is probably resonating with me a fair bit at the moment,
mm.
because I probably always lean towards the accountability side more.
Yes.
And that doesn't always deliver ownership. But yeah, so I suppose the concept of ownership of an outcome resonates with me.
Yeah, beautiful, beautifully said, and that's exactly what this is where we're heading as well. Because I agree with you. So responsibility is something that's given, accountability is external, and often, we hold others accountable. And I'm not debunking that as a management paradigm completely, but we talk about it too much, I think, rather than actually what's the ownership which is taken by individuals, and how do we teach people to take ownership? It's a much more efficient way to do it rather than having a whole bunch of managers who hold others accountable and kind of treat them in a way that probably isn't, at the level they should be treated. But in order to take ownership, we need clarity, resources, and some degree of freedom, not be stifled by a slow bureaucracy. So ownership is really important. All right, decision path. So execution as the default, escalation rather as the default. Decisions forced horizontally, so it kind of goes outwards rather than downwards. So how do we create ownership and accountability? This is me on one of my worst days. I'd like to think so. So we do like to use this as a metaphor because the silverback gorilla uh, is the epitome of authority, and we want to talk about the difference between authority and leadership and why that matters in terms of creating ownership and creating strategy, activation, and line of sight for teams. So this is directly from the work of Heifetz at Harvard, who talks about it took him 15 years to understand the difference between authority and leadership. So he was a medical practitioner. For those who aren't familiar with his work, he kind of crafted the phrase adaptive leadership, and so talks about adaptive and technical change. And again, one of the things that trip teams over is thinking about the technical part and not the adaptive part. But if we think about authority, serves three purposes, so direction, protection, and order. And these are necessary constructs within the role of a manager. Sometimes we overplay them though, particularly around the order. So giving people, the minutia or directing the task. So how do we do these things and vary them, which will create a flow through and create more ownership? As an example, I often hear managers talk about, being the protector of their team from all the crap that comes from up above. Um, so in Heifetz's world, actually, how do we let some of that crap flow through in a very smart, strategic way, which then elevates the tension in your team to be mobilized around, particular actions. Sometimes we have to absolutely block that and reassure them and provide guidance. So the tension is reduced if people are, in that really heightened, triggered state. But often we need to let it flow through so they feel some of the heat of necessary around change. So it's not right or wrong. It's just how do we turn up the Bunsen burner? Sometimes we need to turn it down. And so I really like the metaphor of the silverback gorilla. Again, we overplay this in organizations. So these are some of the roles we can play, and this is directly from our Leader as Coach program. So you can see that all of these have a different kind of focus. Manager has authority. And so sometimes you just have to be the manager and not empower people. So the fire alarm goes off. We're not going to sit around and brainstorm the best way to evacuate. There's certain things that we just need to be the manager for, right? In a mining environment, Greg, as your work is all about, is sometimes we just have to be the authority figure, and the boundaries are clear, and there's not any kind of negotiation around those boundaries. Trainer, people who tend to have an agenda. Counselor, maybe having to go backwards in someone's life rather than before we can go forward. Coaches aren't trained counselors, but we're trying to distinguish between different roles that we can play and create some agility around those roles. Sometimes people get stuck managers get stuck in one particular role. Sometimes it feels like we're a friend to people. Sometimes we mentor, and the difference between mentoring and coaching, mentor is more about that. Someone who's often done the role that we're in and is often imparting wisdom and guidance and telling, which is different to coaching, which is much more of a neutral space. So I offer these up as kind of thinking about, well, what role do I need to play in this moment? Is it leader where I'm taking people to a different place, challenging the status quo, mobilizing people and systems and structures around the strategy? So remember, this is all about mobilizing people. This is about moving away from authority-driven management to something different. Now, where it says coach, if you're not a coach, you can just insert leader here. So do it instead of them, right through to coach or empower. And what that does, of course, is the work is done by the leader on the left-hand side. It's done by your direct report or whoever you're working with on the right-hand side. So it's that simple kind of ask versus tell. I see many leaders, or many leaders declare that they have a coaching leadership style, and then I watch them coach, and they're just layering telling and advice and suggestions, which is not really coaching in that definition. Any thoughts on what we've covered so far? Does this make sense? Thumbs up. This is amazing.
No,
This
this
is
is great.
okay.
This is good.
This is good. Excellent. Thanks, Leanne.
Well, I'm just sort of thinking about it, and I totally agree with it. Um, One thing I suppose is when time comes into it,
Yes.
and people don't have the time, and you kind of like you're actually helping out, and it's not because they don't have the capability. It's more about not having the capacity, and that's like you can leave someone, you can kind of just refuse or not refuse, but rather than just doing it for them,
Yep.
um, I don't know. Sometimes you're doing it for them, you're actually helping them, and it's not about taking away from a learning opportunity, but it's actually
Mm.
putting them up to get other work done. And I probably find that challenging sometimes, because yeah, like you're reluctant to do something for a person, but you're actually helping them if you do. So yeah, it's not always black and white, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think if you're role modeling something and you want to role model that behavior, then you might do it for them and with them, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not hearing in your language at all, but for some people that becomes a disempowering action versus a role modeling kind of action, or just helping them out because they're overwhelmed, which is a different context. That's not a black and white kind of formula.
Yeah, and I guess it's hard to judge that sometimes, whether you are, disempowering them or just helping.
Yeah. I ran a 2-day leaders coach many years ago for one of the people who attended was her role was firefighter within one of the largest banks in Australia, as in the branch, so very operational, customer facing. And she was every 30 seconds or so, 60 seconds, she'd be answering a problem or a question or a solution. Blue screen of death, what do I do? Blah, blah, blah. She came to Leaders Coach 2-day program. 6 months later, she emailed me to say, "Hey, just thought I'd let you know that I've got promoted." And I said, "Oh, how did that happen? You were such a pivotal part of the branch." And she said, "Well, I just stopped telling people what to do." Even in the moment, I'd just use a really simple kind of coaching framework. What's the problem? What are you thinking about doing? What could you do? Go and do it. Now, of course, there's boundaries around, cost or risk to the customer or brand, etc. But those boundaries are often much broader than we kind of give credit for. So, yeah. So even in the heat of the moment, and we do a lot of work in healthcare. And I remember talking with the chief surgeon, chief anaesthetist, chief everyone, and I said, "Of course, you wouldn't be doing this in surgery, right?" And the chief surgeon said, "Of course you do. Of course we coach and train in the moment. We don't leave someone bleed out on the table, but we give people more leeway than we would necessarily do for ourselves. So we don't breach safety, but we teach people and coach them in the moment, which is interesting." Excellent. All right, let's keep moving. Just to save time rather than build this slide, just to finish off this piece on empowerment, I really like this. I've worked with John Whitmore, who's the father of coaching, is now passed away. he and Tim Galway really created the whole notion of coaching in organizations, and it came from golf and tennis and then into organizations. But this formula is brilliant. Performance equals potential minus interference. And I think our role as managers and leaders and coaches is to reduce the interference or help people reduce the interference. What are some quick external interference factors that you see in your teams that kind of get in the way of performance? So external means outside of us individually. What would be some examples?
Corporate teams wanting regular updates on particular issues.
Yep. Yep. Anything that's really external to us. So bureaucracy, poor rules and regulations, the things that really slow us down. Internally, so this is in terms of our mindset. What are some of the things that can slow us down internally from performing? So these are things like fear. So fear of failure, not being good enough, those kinds of things. So as coaches, we often get asked to work with a leader around the external factors. But guess where the conversation goes really quickly to the internal stuff, the frames of reference, the self-limiting beliefs, etc. So yeah, Tessa not having the space to do something well, absolutely. All right, so the final piece here is around meetings, and this might seem like a bit of a funny one. Hang on, we're talking about strategy. So why are we talking about meetings? We know that the research and statistics on the non-value adding nature of many meetings is really strong. And just about every team we work with, not just about every team we work with, aren't satisfied with their meetings. And so meetings can be a massive waste of time or a massive value add. And if you look around the room in your kind of leadership team meetings and add up the salaries and then add up the maybe poor decisions or poor execution, it's a really costly exercise. Sometimes a junior person can call a meeting with 10 senior people in it, and it could be a $10,000 meeting, but to get $10,000 approved in the organizational structure would take seven sign-offs, right? But we can call a meeting without anyone necessarily vetting that. So this is from Wagaman and Hackman. Research around 1,000 teams. The research has been going for 25 years. It is the best research available around leadership teams and how teams should perform. And so we really like this. So these are the things that teams should be able to do. Things like deliver, have broader perspectives, be diverse. The reality is that they severely underperform, underserve stakeholders. As groupthink, egos get in the way, all sorts of things happen. So these are the six conditions that create 80% of the success in teams. And again, we have shown this in much more depth in other webinars, but they're a really nice reminder. What are the six questions I need to ask myself in terms of the team I either lead or the team I'm part of? We're normally both. And so the one we really want to go into today, as I mentioned before, is the ways of working or the structure. So the sound structure is not just about how many are in the team, but is it a real team? And so what the research suggests that when you turn up to a team meeting, and I know this is a generalization, but it's a random sample of hundreds of teams, around 55% of the time in that meeting is about presenting information about my own function or silo versus doing collective work, which is way down the bottom at 8%. And when we're working with teams in a high performance team program or amplify, what we talk about is actually your work, that collective work needs to go up and the providing information needs to go way, way down and find other mechanisms to provide backward facing or backward looking information. So thinking about your meetings, what do they look like and how much do they contribute to the strategy and doing the really high level strategic work? So I probably spoke to this a little bit. How do you distribute concise updates? There's one leadership team I was working with. on average, they'd have around 700 pages of information to read before every meeting. 700 pages. And most of it was pretty operational, pretty tactical, things that could be covered off in different ways. And so, as a result of the work with us, they had a one-page summary, and then they spoke to that. They took off all the operational stuff, went out and was done via their knowledge management system. So their conversations became adaptive, wicked problem. How do we fix, how do we improve patient care, etc. And then finally, yep, many people think meetings are a waste of time. Some are great, of course. So how do we really structure our meetings in a more effective way? So one of the best books I've read is by it's The Surprising Science of Meetings, and we actually created a scorecard around this. So this is my own assessment of our meetings internally. This is one of 4 scorecards we have. So if you would like to scan that, you can do this later. This is probably the longest one we have. It takes about 6 or 7 minutes, whereas the ones around team leadership and organization are more 3 or 4 minutes. But you'll get a really great report, some links to other resources. So focusing on our meetings can be hugely impactful. So here's the guy. Here's the book I was talking about before. So The Surprising Science of Meetings. Not one of the, no, it is the best book I've ever read on meetings. It's awesome. All right, so we're back to, so we're not quite back there yet. So how do we create really great meetings? So replace the traditional status meetings, and I know red, amber, green in a way is a status meeting, but not the red, amber, green often unblocks work that is blocked. So how do we really have those honest, vulnerable based conversations? So the Ford Motor Company, as listed there, they pioneered this, where the new CEO really said, why are all our projects green? I don't kind of believe it. And every time someone was brave enough to say it's a yellow or a red, he called them out and celebrated the fact that they'd called out the true status of the meeting. So how do we move from everything being green and running really well to more honest conversations around our meetings and structure? All right, so these are the things we have covered, 5 areas, and I'm going to summarize what we've covered in a sec, but around those 5 areas. And I think these are the key takeaways, really. It says 5 considerations, but I added a 6th this morning, so there's actually 6. Create a one-page strategy map and make it visible. Structure team meetings around those 3 to 4 pillars. So one of the best ways to embed strategy and strategy execution line of sight, which is what we've been talking about today, is force. So it's one of those structural elements. Force the team to talk and structure around your meeting agenda around your strategy. When I talk about that with teams, they go, "Oh, yeah, that's a really good idea." So it keeps you focused on the strategy in every single meeting. Have clear owners, have a small set of outcomes that team can actually influence and be clear on those, not 600 projects. Make clear stop-start decisions. So, be really, very focused on what you should stop doing. And then finally, engage in the regular sense-making conversations, as I was just mentioning. So this is the journey we've been on. We've talked about a whole range of things, particularly the left-hand side, business performance, but we have infused a little bit of the vitality method and a little bit from the leadership framework to really support us in terms of that line of sight piece. So we won't spend time on it now, but we just invite you to think about this, take a screenshot of it or a photograph of it. We'd love, remember the 7 frogs on the log? We'd love you to take action as a result of this webinar. And one of those pieces of action is to come up with your own 30-day plan. So it's super clear.
I think just on that, Phil, I was just going to mention that, if you haven't already booked the precision call, that's an opportunity to actually make that happen and put that plan into place. So, highly recommend. popping that in the diary.
That's in the chat. Yeah, I think a link just went
Yeah,
in.
yep. I've
Yep.
just popped that into the chat for
Excellent.
anybody that wants to have a look at that. Um, and yeah, I just want to say, I've personally taken a lot out of today's session. I'm sure everybody else on the call has as well. Would love to hear maybe one or two things from everybody in the room, just in the chat as to, what really stood out to you today. What are you going to take away? What's one thing that you can see that you can do differently after today's session when it comes to strategy execution? Would just love to hear a little bit of feedback there. Um, from everyone on the call.
We've had a few drop off. We've got
I
we've got a
know.
smaller group. I know I
That's
had
okay.
someone had to drop off earlier.
Yeah, there were a few that needed to drop
Yeah.
off earlier, but that's yeah, that's all good. But yeah, would love to hear in the chat. But as you're popping those into the chat, I think we would love to invite anybody that's been here on the call today to have a look and consider our Amplify Mastermind as an option for support for you, whether it's yourself or another leader in your organization. Because today we focused just on one component from our Amplify system architecture, and there are 27 key components of the model. And so, we would love to support your organizations in or individuals within the organization as a part of that. So, yeah, as you can see here, if you're leading a team or function inside a fast-moving, complex, or evolving business and you have 5 or more years experience, if your team maybe isn't quite stepping up yet, maybe if they're not thinking critically, if you're feeling a bit stretched but you're really committed, this could be something to consider for yourself or for another leader in your business. So, just as a really brief overview, we within the mastermind we have one-on-one touch points, and we have two-day workshops throughout the year, each year. And then we also have ongoing support. And so, what that looks like is 6 week cycles where we come together for thought leadership workshops. So, sharing more detailed information around the what. We also come together for mastermind or group coaching sessions where we collectively learn together and implement, look at how we implement back into our own businesses and organizations. And then there's office hours drop-ins along the way as well. So there's a lot as part of the mastermind, and we would love to have some of you join us in that program. There is 8 places left for our April intake, and we still have a couple of spots left for founding member pricing, which is a significant discount of $1,000 a month. So yeah, I'll pop in a link to the document there so you can have a bit more of a look. The applications for this month close on the 31st of March, which is next Tuesday. So I'm just popping in the brochure there into the chat. And we've got some people come through into the chat here. Greg, thank you. Team cohesion and effectiveness is crucial. Absolutely. Tessa, key takeaway, clearer accountability, less fluffy, clear is kind. Yes, love it. Rebecca agreed. Accountability is crucial and ensuring people have the support and structure to take on that accountability. Yeah, fantastic. So lots of key takeaways here today. If there's any questions, if you'd like to, ask any questions from Phil, or whether it's about the Amplify Mastermind or about what you've learnt today, we've still got 5 more minutes, which is very rare in these sessions. Did you want to wrap up with anything else, Phil?
No, I think you wrapped it up beautifully. It just yeah, hopefully you've got some value, and we've really tried to focus on the tripwires for teams that we see over and over and over again over the years. So that's why I really tried to make it not so much all encompassing, but just not focus on line of sight, which is one area, but what are the areas that really support line of sight and clarity. So yeah, if there's any questions, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, thanks so much for being part of the group today.